Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for NCUI's fifth and last Get Out the Vote, Get Out the Census best practice webinar trainings. And before we get started, I want to ask everyone if you can provide your name, tribal affiliation, organization, or location by typing in the Facebook Live comment box. We'll be starting in a minute or two, just trying to get people to give some time to put their information in. Okay, next slide. Hello, everyone. My name is Sabu Kuyumjian. I am the Public Health Associate at the National Council of Urban Indian Health, or NCUI for short, and I work within the Technical Assistance Center, and I'm accompanied by my colleague, Dr. Mark Clark. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Clark, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Technical Assistance and Research Center here at NCUI.
And next slide, please. So thank you all again for joining. And if you are just logging on to our Facebook Live event, please make sure to provide your name, tribal affiliation, organization, or location as we continue along with this webinar. I just wanted to, before we get started, I wanted to provide a little information on NCUI, on the National Council of Urban Indian Health. We are the only nonprofit organization devoted to the support and development of quality, accessible, and culturally competent healthcare services for American Indian and Alaska Natives in urban settings. NCUI was created in 1998 by urban Indian leaders to advance healthcare of American Indian and Alaska Natives. NCUI provides technical assistance support to UIOs for implementing quality, accessible healthcare services. We advocate for Indian healthcare with Congress and federal government, and we provide technical assistance support to our 41 tribal urban Indian organizations across the nation. Next slide, please. And now we're here for our webinar. So I wanted to kind of just I'm happy everyone's here. So our session is gonna focus on best practices in increasing Native youth civic engagement and empowering the Native vote. And our presenters today are Debbie Nez-Manuel, who is a community leader and sits on a nonprofit board member. We have Megan LaRose, Navajo as well, and she's the co-founder of Morningstar Leaders. And we have McKenzie as well, who's the campaign field captain. And then we have Tia Yazzie, who's also Navajo, and she's a Title VII Indian Education coordinator and Cohort 3 NCUI Youth Council member. So without further ado, I will now give Debbie the mic to start her presentation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, day. She a sanja kininjle. Salna besni bashish chin. Sitna jini dashiche. Kabahan dashinale. She a late. What day is a dead nasha. Kun the Salt River Indian Community Shugan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Debbie Nez-Manuel. I am so happy to join everyone here on just getting this information out to all of our urban areas and to our communities who are looking for some framework. So glad to join you on this presentation. Feel free to change the slide. So our organization, Morning Star Leaders, was organized by our youth in our community. You'll hear from one of them in a bit here, but we are organized this past year, an effort to bring out the voices of Indigenous voters. And by bringing together a multi-generational group of individuals who are youth, community leaders, former leaders, and nonprofit leaders, we determined that we needed to hear more and to learn more about our voters. And so we mobilized and we formed this organization. And the logo that you see in the top right-hand corner symbolizes how political parties come together to voice their thoughts or their beliefs or values in our systems. And so the logo that you see is really one that brings together all of those shades of people. Next slide, please. And in that effort, we were learning that it was so important to figure out how to move forward, and we couldn't do that without these individuals. So we formed a focus group. We asked a lot of questions, and as a result of that information, created our resiliency framework. What inspires our youth? You know, what inspires one to vote? And this was engaged voices of our elders, parents, and youth. And it brings out four themes that we extracted. One is that most people voted because they had a veteran or someone in the military that they admired and they felt compelled to support them because of their public service. Another area was making sure that we that we considered what our grandparents had gone through, the resiliency that they had to have had and within them to pursue what they wanted for themselves and their grandchildren, great grandchildren. And so if our ancestors couldn't vote, you know, we could do that today. Another theme that came out was something more contemporary, is that for those who didn't show up to express their vote in a ballot form, ultimately we're giving more power to other voters who did submit a ballot. And that was something like there are good citizens who do get others elected. And then one is a more modern thought, is that we could take our Indigenous principles and weave it into this Western practice or political framework that is here and is not going anywhere soon. But how could we weave them together so it benefits our policies in Indian country that affect us in health, education, in culture, language, and infrastructure, and natural resources. So these are four themes that came out. The next area we looked at is the 4 levels of consciousness. So next slide, please. So in looking at this, we uncovered in partnership with another organization, the Instituto, is that there were 4 layers of consciousness that voters experience. One is that they didn't believe they could have any effect on or impact on what was happening. Therefore, they were unengaged, disengaged. But if they had a little bit information or education, they could get this sense of, yeah, I could make a difference. But with more consistent education and follow-up and conversation, they could reach a level of being, you know, having this critical thought process grow. And so this is the level of consciousness. So next slide, please. And out of that group of focus group that we were looking at, we were talking about how important it was to pull out, themes from those questions. And some of the things that we learned was that voters in our urban area here were registered, they were informed, and they did want to vote. They liked to mail their ballots in, which was real positive. And they also actively voted both in their tribal and non-tribal elections. But they recognized that they recognized that their neighbors didn't equally share voting issues, especially things that were really important when it came to missing and murdered Indigenous women, or maybe issues about infrastructure. Having access to broadband was another area. Next slide, please. I think another area that we uncovered was that, which was really significant, was that voters felt really connected to their community, to their tribal leaders and their network. However, they didn't have a knowledge of who their legislators were, if they were at the state or the federal level. There was a clear disconnect there. And the question we asked ourselves is, what can we do about this? How can we change this? And then we just found it was really important to connect voters to information on these specific issues that were relevant to them. That focus group really provided a lot of insight for us, so we could share that information with our community through listening sessions and conversation starters. Next slide, please. And I'll hand this off over to Tia to give you more information about the work they're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, Debbie, and thank you, Sabu and Mark, and thank you to NCUIH for inviting me to this awesome event. So Yat e Shea Tia Yazzie Yaneshia, Honogaki Nishlan, Todachitni Bushes Chin, Honogaki Dashache, Auto Maidashkishi Dashanele. Hi everybody, my name's Tia. So I'll be talking to you today about how youth can get civically engaged in their native communities, and also giving out some voting resources. Next slide, please. Great, so as a Native youth, I currently live in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I kind of wanted to talk about what civic engagement means to me. So for me, it's to want change in our communities and to improve and promote equity and equality in political and non-political ways. So that can be, civic engagement can look different in many ways in an urban environment and on the reservation. But there are some forms of civic engagement. A big one is volunteering, political activism, participating in community events, but also voting at federal, state, and tribal levels, and taking the census. And there's so much more that you can do. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. Awesome. So I believe that cultural engagement also is civic engagement. So a couple examples of cultural engagement might be going to powwows, attending drum circles, going to ceremonies, talking your language, going to events at your local urban Indian centers, chapter houses, attending tribal council meetings and voting, knowing treaty rights, and educating our state representatives on our treaty rights. And something that I really like about cultural engagement is that, like the NAYA Family Center says on the bottom, is that a strong sense of cultural identity naturally leads to desire to participate in civic life. So strengthening our cultural engagement also strengthens our community wellness and builds up our community. So next slide, please. Awesome. So a couple examples I would like to give of what civic engagement I've participated in during the pandemic. So because of COVID, we had a lot of stoppage here at the Urban Indian Center, but that doesn't mean that we weren't able to participate and better our community. One thing that we did was a 2020 census drive-through. So we got people from the community to drive through the Urban Indian Center, and there was a couple incentives, but they could fill it out just from their car, and it was a safe and way to communicate, but also to participate in the census. And through my position as Title VI coordinator, I was able to help the Urban Indian Center send out this information via email or through phone calls or just word of mouth. So we have a great partnership through my school district and through the Urban Indian Center. Another thing that we did was we collected firewood for Native American elders on the Navajo Nation and on the Ute Reservation. We had hurricane winds here earlier in the year, which was super crazy, but we eventually led to an idea where we could collect the firewood from the debris and take it to the reservation because we know it's much needed for our elders. So that was a safe way for us to participate and better our community, not only here in the urban environment, but also to influence the reservation and the people who live on the reservations. And the last example that I would like to give is just voting in the 2020 election. So this infographic says Native voices matter and your voices matter. And I'll give some data and a couple of statistics on the next slide. Awesome, thank you. So as you can see, your vote turns into representation. So currently there are 4 American Indian and Alaska Natives in nationwide office, including Congresswoman Deb Haaland, Congressman Tom Cole, Sharice Davids, and Mark Wayne Mullen. So as you can see, we have a lot of representation, and I think it's very cool. And I've got to meet them, and they're all really great people who advocate for us in both urban environments and tribal environments. And so it's super awesome we have this representation. So currently we have 3.5 million voting age American Indian and Alaskan Native peoples throughout the United States. We have 12 candidates that are American Indian and Alaskan Native running for nationwide office in 2020, which is the most that have run in any year in history. And then we have 73 in office of American Indian and Alaska Natives in state offices around the country. So ultimately your voice and your vote can make the difference, and that's at all levels, tribal, state, and federal. And then I'll hand it over to Kenzie and Megan to talk about a little bit of their experience and on their voting journey. Oh, shoot, sorry, I forgot this slide, my bad. So how can youth become more civically engaged? So you've seen the examples, I stated a couple. It can be as big as forming Morningstar leaders. It could be as small as just going to volunteer at your local centers or at youth community events. But ultimately your voice matters, and just advocate and promote what you're passionate about, and take care of yourself too, because ultimately taking care of yourself leads to taking care of others. And then anything that you do will make a difference. And so just remember those words and keep going. And yeah, so I'll hand it over to Kenzie and Megan now.
Thank you, Tia. I really appreciate your words. I know in high school, I did a few of those things, being culturally engaged in my community. And at the time, I didn't know that would be considered civic engagement. So I think that's really important to share with younger people. But when I was just getting started, I didn't feel like the work that I've done was enough. And I actually started organizing with an organization, and it was my first time being hired as a field organizer, and I was really nervous. I felt uneducated, and I really felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't belong there. And I think that's because I wasn't exposed to these types of opportunities. Even though I was volunteering in my community, it was through cultural activities. So I didn't feel like those counted. And after about 3 weeks, I got to know my team, and they were very nice. They really wanted to know more about tribes. They were very interested in our culture. And I learned how to use the digital tools like Van and through text and the dialer. And I met my voter engagement goals, which was really big for me. I was so proud of myself, coming from not being, having like any experience in the political arena, and then coming in and meeting voter engagement goals was huge. And one of the things that got me through through this was knowing that after I'm going to be educated and I'm going to be able to train other people and other youth that would like this opportunity. So once the campaign came to an end, I recognized how I could apply what I've learned to the Morningstar leaders. And I know that there's a lot of youth there who volunteer, who are culturally engaged, who are ready to do the work. So I helped to train them. And since then, we've had a lot of get out the vote campaigns. So they're very successful, and everything that I had learned from the previous time had come into play. So recently we've had the Tiara 2.0, the Indigenous Peoples Day, and more voter connections than ever before, because I had that opportunity. And I think it's really important for other youth to experience that as well. And I'll pass it on to McKenzie, and she has more insight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Megan. My name is McKenzie. I am McKenzie Dockerty. I am from the Pascua Yaqui tribe here in Arizona, Guadalupe. I am currently a sophomore attending South Mountain Community College, getting my certificate in behavioral science. And here is my story in different ways I kept myself informed and more engaged with voting. I increased my knowledge and understanding by becoming a precinct member in my community, and I also learned the information I can share with my community. And I also applied my knowledge in the field by knocking on doors and sharing information and answering voter questions. And I also learned how to use digital tools like BAN. And I began recognizing campaign documents and learning their requirement by law. And I also witnessed a challenge that campaigns faced during the pandemic. Like, they weren't be able to make personal connections with voters. And it was really strange. Like, it wasn't strange, but it was a difficult thing that they faced. And with more experience, I developed into a field captain's role, which is simply just handing more responsibilities, like with Van, and just like making other documents that are important for the campaign. And it feels good knowing that I'm helping people at the same time and also learning how to communicate with my community. And I'm gonna pass it back to Debbie.
Thank you so much, Kenzie. I'm so proud of these young people for, taking a risk that involves them stepping into a place where it is really unknown. I mean, coming from an arena where there's any kind of politics, it is very challenging, and for them to take up that challenge and just move with it, I'm really proud of them. So thank you, Megan and Kenzie, for dedicating your time. To move forward about our next steps as an organization, as communities, as people out there from the nonprofit sectors, how do we go forward? We're in the next few days, we're preparing to take part in elections all across the country, and moving forward is thinking about how do we hold those elected leaders accountable, because many of them committed to us what they intend to do or how they intend to support our communities, but now it's time to figure that out. So from our focus group, we were talking about how do we do that, because they were concerned about accountability. They wanted to make sure that that people actually carried out steps and actions, that they were kept engaged throughout this time, that they also created some sort of communication and conversation, not just to speak at them about issues, but also to engage them in solutions, and to create that connection. The other area that was really critical from this group that we talked with was the importance of transparency. No matter when or what process, they wanted to be included and they wanted to know. And I think that the pandemic showed us how important that was, when issues impacting our health were so critical. If we went somewhere, if we did something, we needed to know from our leaders that our health was being prioritized. We also the group also indicated how important it was to be included in that process, and to be able to participate and for them to extend solutions. And then, bottom line, no matter what it was, is that they would be educated in this process. So these were the voters that were speaking, and I agreed, in a lot of ways. Even for me, those things are very important. Next slide, please. And so as we move forward, we started looking at how do we do this. So as an organization, it's creating metrics are often tools that organizations use, but we can also, as citizens, hold our elected leaders to some sort of accountability. And so having us created a metrics that is relevant to our community. If we were a nonprofit organization, if we were citizens, if we were a neighborhood, we could find ways that made all of this possible. These relevancies include the making sure that we get our elected leaders to places where we're gathering, where we're talking, where we're visiting tribal spaces. So here in Arizona, we have 22 tribal spaces. All of our elected leaders should visit some of those places at some point and really see what tribal communities are dealing with. Even within the urban setting, there's a lot of neighborhoods and pockets they could visit. We should be hosting gatherings where we understand what legislations are being brought forward. How could we support, legislation that's important for us, and then, for our elected leaders to hold listening sessions or town halls where they get to hear what we believe solutions will work, or hear our ideas. So we're a part of that process. And importantly, as they get to know their role in our communities and those elected positions, that they publish articles that educate the entire, state, area or region. And then that they also share this with media, because our elected officials have privilege in that sense, is that they have direct keys to media. So it would be a responsibility of theirs and their constituents to share this with the public, and then to organize that in a way that happens every season, because as tribal people, we operate and do things based on the season. There's times of renewal, there's all the way to times of harvest. There's so much that happens, and how can we get our leaders to come full circle and commit to following through, and not just hear from officials during election time. So we're really trying to help our youth understand the importance of following through. Next slide. So I think that, as we go forward, these next steps and these solutions often lead us to, well, where do we find these resources? And here's Tia on some of those resources.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, so just to wrap everything up, here are some resources that we could provide you on your journey, or the youth. So the first one is the Unity Youth Voter Registration Guide link. So it answers some questions, including like how COVID might impact the election where you live, how to vote by mail, how to vote by mail in every state. So there's specific information on here to where you might live in your urban environment or in your reservation. Next slide, please. Awesome. So continuing on for Native youth, if you're not 18 yet, but you will be by election day, here's some information for you and how you can register under these rules. It doesn't take too long, so it's very, it's here for you to take advantage of. But also, if you can't vote this year, you can help your friends and your family get registered. So there's a link at the very bottom to help you and get your family and friends out there to vote. Next slide, please. Awesome. So, and then these are some more resources on finding your polling station, another toolkit and conversation guide, a PDF that's a virtual tool that you can share with your contacts, and then the National Urban Indian Family Coalition voter portal, which is a one-stop guide for all voter registration information needs. And then the next slide. So this last one, it's for Unhoused Voting Guide by the National Coalition for the Homeless. voter education toolkit, and then another virtual tool you could use. So all these resources will be available online through the NCUIH website. You can find it, I think, in 48 hours, and you can access these resources very soon.
And thank you so much for all our speakers, Debbie, Megan, Kenzie, and Tia. Really great information. And we want to kind of dedicate some time for those who are joining and those who are watching. If there's any questions that you might have, or anything that might help you in your area, or maybe some more examples and ways that some of our presenters shared to keep Native youth engaged, to keep all of you who are watching to do the best you can, during this time. So we'll give a few minutes just to kind of check the Facebook Live box, but please type in any comments or questions you might have.
Thanks for monitoring that chat function for us from Facebook so that we can put all of our questions and comments in one spot. I did have sort of an opening question, and maybe any one of our panelists could volunteer to take a crack at this answer. The root word for democracy is demos, D-E-M-O, and of course people is what that word translates to. So there's something about being willing to connect with people by communicating, even digitally, that is really at the heart of all this activity. So I'm curious if there's a way in which young people who are maybe sometimes shy or reluctant to speak out get acclimated to being people-centered in a way that helps them want to stay actively engaged, because that's such an important quality for this kind of work. What do you suggest young people do to get us started at that kind of activity? Let me get one idea. I'm thinking of sometimes there's student government in school. There's other kinds of student organizations and clubs that give you an opportunity to work with maybe smaller groups or a group of friends where you're getting an opportunity to exercise some leadership skills, so you get accustomed to feeling comfortable to speaking out to your friends, and that's sort of where that leadership activity begins, sometimes in really small circles, but it has to start somewhere. So I'm just, maybe you have a story to share about how you got started in being engaged.
Yeah,
This
I
is
think I
Debbie.
can. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Debbie.
I was trying not to take up the time from the youth and responding, but we're asking that question, and it would be challenging probably for them to figure out where they got started. But in Morningstar Leaders, we have a youth council, and our youth council was significantly active the last 5 years until more recently with all of the changes happening. But our youth were always challenged to speak out on issues, and we had a incremental process in places. If they felt something was important to them or they felt really passionate, we challenged them to share a report about those findings with our youth council. And if they were considered, sharing this in a larger space, they could share it in a workshop at a conference. But some of the goals we created was for them to organize their thoughts, create a presentation, and then we would bring in or invite mentors in the local community to sit on a panel and give them feedback. And once they did that, then they were prepared for a workshop. And then if they did really well, they were often invited back for the next step of being asked to be a keynote speaker. So we would gradually and incrementally challenge them to take those risks. And Megan is really one who's grown in that environment and challenged her peers to do the same. And Kenzie is well on her way to doing things that she cares about. So it is a great opportunity for young people to start with either a youth council or with a Boys and Girls Club for the Boys and Girls Club Youth of the Year program. So as long as you set target goals for them, I think they are more than they're going to be eager to take on that, that challenge. So Tia?
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I totally agree. And on my journey growing up, I went to school both on the reservation and here in Salt Lake City. And my time here in Salt Lake City, I was the only Native in my school, and that was super hard for me. But that ultimately led me to start a club to educate the non-Natives I was around on our issues and on our culture. And that influenced me in multiple ways, but also the way I was influenced because of my mom and the people around me. I think for Native youth, it just takes one mentor or one person for them to see and to follow. And I try to be that for my students that I currently teach and have under my program. I try to establish middle school and high school Native American clubs or Indigenous clubs. And that way we can talk about issues in our urban community, but also on the reservation so that they're aware of both environments. And I try to be that mentor and that support for them to follow. And that way that they can start, I guess, like bringing out their voice and having somebody who can support them along the way.
That's great. I really appreciate those responses. I think Megan was nodding her head in agreement. I was just watching folks on our screens here. I really appreciate your taking a shot at answering that question, and I certainly hope I didn't put anyone on the spot. But those ideas of not only adults have a responsibility to create opportunities for young people to exercise those skills and to grow, and within your own circles of friends, relatives, and others, those moments where you have an opportunity to speak your mind, while they may be rare, they are those kinds of moments where that whole political awareness, exercising that skill and learning to speak out and feeling comfortable with framing your opinion in such a way that you can persuade others or share it with others or engage in dialogue with others is really the beginning of where civic engagement becomes meaningful for us as individuals. So I appreciate your taking a crack at that question. We keeping an eye on the chat box. Haven't seen other questions pop up. I think Sabu, do you have closing remarks? Are there others, any slides or other things we need to share? I'll pass the baton to Sabu.
Yeah, I was gonna go ahead and do that. I don't know, Megan, if you want to share a little bit about your experience. I know you pressed the mic, but I don't know if you're okay with it. I didn't wanna, if you want to share your experience and how you started a little bit.
I think my experience is a little bit different than many other youth. I had an amazing mom who listened to me and helped me start an organization for youth in my community. One thing that Tia and I had in common is that we didn't have a lot of other Native youth around. In the school that I was in, it was highly non-Native youth. But when I did find them in the urban community, we tend to stick together. And I think we find community in one another. So when you bring Native youth together, especially in areas where we don't see each other very often, we stick together. So I think having an organization for Native youth, bringing them together in groups to spend time with one another, not just to volunteer and do work, is really important because we need to spend time and socialize together to feel welcomed.
Thank you so much. That's good. I'm appreciate your insights and showing your similar experiences as Tia, and being able to find community when it's hard to find, and building on that. And I forgot to mention happy birthday to Debbie. She's doing a lot for Indian country and for her community. So we wanted to also thank her on her birthday doing this. So wanted to give you your flowers.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I feel loved today.
That's wonderful.
And I think I think there hasn't been any other questions in the comments box, but I think next slide that I wanted to just share was, we have, it's the last week before the national election, so we're just trying to put together some take action items moving forward, especially since it's the last week. So we put together a couple of links here that really focus on, finding a polling station, checking your registration status if you still wanted to submit a mail-in ballot that you had, or, in person if you're living in an urban setting. Um, and also we put together these two infographics that really are meant as resources for everyone participating, and anyone who wants to post on their own social media sites. It's really NCUI's communication team really did a great job of thinking about the aspects of Native representation, as Tia shared today, and also other ways of why your vote matters, from COVID-19 all the way to safety in your community, and what that means. And so we are providing this as resources, and we'll get definitely this PDF with all these clickable links to all of you, so you can have this information sooner than later. And we also are providing a link to all our prior Get Out the Vote, Get Out the Census trainings and webinars. It's on one page. That's where you'll find a lot of this information, but we'll make sure to upload that, as soon as possible, since, we have probably a week left before national elections. So we appreciate you. Can we go to the next slide? I wanted to also just mention that, today's session was made possible by the funding of National Urban Indian Family Coalition. So we really appreciate their support in making sure that Native voices are heard, and we have great speakers just like Debbie and everyone here today to be able to speak and share their stories with all of you, and inspire you to do what you can in the last week of our elections, and thinking about taking actions moving forward after November 4th. And on that note, I will give back your time. There's 15, we were early 15 minutes. So thank you all again for joining, and we'll see you all again, hopefully with future events in thinking about how to move forward after November 4th and keeping our elected officials accountable.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye now.